everyone, Amanda here. We're coming up on our 1-year anniversary in January, and we'd like to celebrate you, the listeners, who have made this possible. Every Wednesday of December, we'll be putting up a trivia question on our Instagram and Facebook pages. All you have to do is answer the question correctly and tag a friend. We'll draw winners each week. If you participate in every drawing, you will be entered to win a t-shirt. Each t-shirt is handmade by Rita's talented husband, Nick Vigil, who is a local graphic designer here in Spokane. If you don't already follow us, you can find us by searching our name or by our username at IDKHerPodcast. We hope you enter our drawings, and thank you for listening.
How many times must you be told? There's nowhere that we don't go.
He's got good practice. What's a beautiful girl like you to embrace from a place like this? Winning.
Hello, everyone.
Hey there, guys.
This is Amanda,
This is Rita.
and we are I Don't Know Her, the podcast where we talk about women you've probably never heard of, but you should have.
And you will.
So we were like on a roll this morning. We always get together before we podcast and just like catch up and talk about things. And it was an almost hour and a half of us just sitting around chatting.
We can talk. I've
We
noticed
can.
that.
Hence the reason why we had to do all of that kind of talking before we get on the mic. Otherwise, you guys would have a 2-hour long episode and it was mostly us
Special
talking.
episode, 3 hours.
So we were just ruminating on what are some topics that we wanted to talk about today. And I had mentioned that I just finished reading very quickly Lindy West's new book, The Witches Are Coming. And I highly recommend it for anybody. And actually, I did it as an audiobook. And I love listening to Lindy talk in general. And she read her own book. So that's always
awesome.
cool.
Yeah.
And that means all the proceeds go to her. You know what I mean? Instead of like some other person.
Mm-hmm.
So she read the book, and it was a fascinating read. It's a collection of essays that are sort of cultural critiques from a fat feminist perspective. And I love Lindy's writing. She also wrote the book Shrill, which was more of a memoir, and that was turned into a television show on Hulu.
Mm-hmm.
Which features like the first fat feminist woman to get an abortion in a pilot episode.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
She's living her truth, which I like.
Yeah. And I had actually, so Amanda introduced me to Lindy, and I'm sadly brand new to her. I had no idea that she's been around for over a decade.
Well, she's been a writer for quite some time, but she started out like, you know, as most writers do, with like a small gig, and she worked at The Stranger over in Seattle, and she's a Seattle-based writer, and she still lives in Seattle. So her work was familiar to me because I remember the controversy about taking down Dan Savage for hating on fat people.
Mm-hmm.
But then she became a writer at Jezebel, and that's when I really became familiar with her work. Because at that time, when she was there, I was a pretty avid reader of Jezebel. And I liked what she had to say. She was also extremely funny. She did these like retro movie reviews where she would like review a movie that is like a decade old or more. So one of them was Garden State, and it is delicious.
Ooh, I like that she's not afraid.
No.
Too, what Amanda was telling me about this new book that she put out, one of the topics that she hits on, which really resonates with us, is anger and rage.
And how forever, basically, women are told to not be angry. It's an unbecoming quality.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are angry, it's something to be maligned, or in some way, you should cover it up or get over it or whatever.
That same old, put a smile on your face, smile even though you're not happy.
Yeah. And the smile thing, Rita brought up earlier when we were having our pre-show chat, and about a customer. You should relay that, because that story is incredible.
So this older gentleman comes into the restaurant. This happened to my coworker, not to me. My coworker, she's taking his order, and he's with this young woman, a lot younger. Like she said, he was probably 65, maybe late 60s, and she's very, very young. And this girl's ordering all this stuff off the menu. She's helping him. Fine interaction. And then when it comes to time to cash him out, he looks at her and he's like, well, I'll tip you if you smile. And she was like, I was so fucking pissed. And of course she can't say that. She wanted to.
But didn't she say, I don't need the tip
She
that
said, I
badly?
don't need it that bad. And then his second interaction was with my boss. And my coworker, she had walked away and she was doing something else. And the gentleman points at her and he's like, what's with your coworker over there? And my boss was like, I didn't really notice anything. She's fine. And he goes, oh, she's kind of in a mood. She's kind of grumpy. And he said, you know, I'm a nice guy and I got lots of money. And he goes, see that girl over there? She's 23
Ugh.
and I'm charming. You don't get a girl like that if you're not charming. And my boss was like, I needed a shower. He's like, that guy was a crap bag. Is what he called him.
And then we get asked, like, oh, why are you so angry? Or you have nothing to be angry about. I mean, it is 2019 and some dude felt like it was 100% acceptable to say that.
Yeah. And
to a grown-ass woman.
And to put her on a spot like, I will pay you to entertain me in a way.
Yeah, to be my dancing little monkey.
It makes you feel gross.
There's like elements of classism, misogyny, and sexism happening there that is just, it's stomach turning.
Which I'm sure on a day-to-day basis in all different kinds of scenarios, women are faced with that.
Mhm.
And they will smile or choke it down. And then they turn around and they're seething. They're mad. They're upset. And she was pissed, but she couldn't say anything because she's at work. But what would happen if we started getting openly, outright angry?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Lindy talked about is that, you know, when we start wringing our hands about like, well, all of these Me Too accusers and stuff like that, like, you know, now men are afraid to so much as work in the same office with a woman.
I heard a man say that. He goes, it's a really, really scary time for men right now. He's like, women have a lot of power. I was like, what?
I mean, the delusion, the absolute fucking delusion of that. Like, you have to be missing some serious brain cells to really not be able to conceptualize what's actually happening.
It's been a bad millennia for women. How about that?
How about, like,
a very scary time for us.
How about many, many more than just one? And that's kind of the thing that was like, really, I resonated a lot with Lindy's new book is that like, she's saying it is okay to be righteously angry. We all have a reason to be angry right now. Women, people of color, God forbid you're both or queer and all three. Like, you know, there's just been a lot of injustices and over time they've just built up and built up. And there are reasons to be hopeful. Like the fact that we're having these conversations is a step in the right direction. But as Lindy was saying, like these men who are afraid that like they no longer can have a conversation without being accused of sexual assault, one, you're doing conversation wrong. If your worry is that might happen.
Yeah.
But two, when you look at these big famous men who have been accused of something and faced consequences, God forbid.
Yeah.
It's not like those consequences have actually, quote, ruined their lives.
Yeah. It doesn't stop them from making money. Doesn't stop Weinstein from getting invited to places. It doesn't stop them from getting that next movie, that next book,
or
that next
Louis
gig.
C.K. going on a tour this summer
And people buying their tickets.
and going to see him and laughing and defending him.
Yeah.
And Matt Lauer's trying to do a whole comeback right now. I mean, what man has like actually had their life ruined? Did they have to step down from a position? Sure. But are they bereft of money? Are they living on the streets?
Are they dragged through what a lot of women get, like dragged through the internet, pictures, their homes being sent stuff.
Well,
Just
and in the case
torn
of
apart on the internet.
in the case of Christine Blasey Ford, who testified unwillingly, but did so out of the goodness for democracy at the confirmation hearings for Brett Kavanaugh. One of these two sexually assaulted somebody at a party, allegedly. and the other got to become a Supreme Court justice. One has had to move 3 times, has to pay out of her own pocket a security detail to keep her and her family safe, and cannot return to work.
Mm-hmm.
The other is a Supreme Court justice.
Mm-hmm.
So you tell me which one of those faced dire consequences.
Yeah.
And that would be why we're angry. And so, as Lindy said in her book, yeah, it is a witch hunt. And I am a witch. And I'm hunting you. Oh, that was a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're first this week.
Yes.
And I already know just a tidbit because she mentioned it, that this woman is Brazilian.
She lives in Brazil. She's
Oh.
actually not Brazilian.
Okay. I just wanted to say that this is close to my heart because
Yes.
I grew up with exchange students from Brazil, and I learned how to read and speak Portuguesa during that time. And so I went to Brazil, and I cannot speak it now, kind of, but not like I did. And so I'm very curious. I'm like so excited. I'm a little giddy about it because I want to hear the words and be like, I know that word. Or, yeah, I used to know that
I
word.
used to know that word. I think, okay, I won't tell you the one word that I needed help with pronunciation yet because we'll see if you know what it means.
Okay. So lay it on me.
So the lady I have today is Chu Ming Silveira.
I don't know her.
It's quite a name.
Yeah.
She is an architect and a designer.
Ooh, we're going back to Maya Lin. Maya Lin days.
So I was thinking of Maya as I was doing this one. I was like, oh, it's very similar. She was the daughter of Chu Chen and Shui Young and was the second of 4 children. Her father was a civil engineer, and during the Chinese Civil War, he served in the Chiang Kai-shek nationalist military. In 1949, after the victory of the communists, Chu's family was threatened with violent persecution and oppression for representing the other side. So her father decided to take the family and move to Hong Kong. They remained there for about, I think she said like about 4 years in the hopes of making it to America. In 1950, the family traveled from Hong Kong to Brazil on a 3-month ship voyage.
Oh, God, that sounds hideous.
Terrible. They arrived in Rio de Janeiro.
Rio de Janeiro.
Is that how you say it? Ooh. The family settled in, is it Sao Paulo?
São Paulo.
Okay. In the neighborhood of Pinheiros.
I don't know that
Okay.
neighborhood.
She was about 10 years old at this time. So the family settles in Brazil. They actually never make it to the U.S. Chu finishes school. She finishes high school there, and she starts studying architecture at the Mackenzie University in Sao Paulo. There, she graduated with a master's in architecture in 1964. She ended up setting up her own private architecture office. And there, she really did thrive with developing several building projects throughout Sao Paulo.
Mm-hmm.
Her design style was super functional, clean lines, and she really liked using the design concept of feng shui, which a lot of people know
Yeah.
that now. And it was big in the 60s, right?
It was like, wasn't it like the 70s that feng shui became like
the thing.
yeah.
Yeah. A few years after starting her firm, she married a fellow architect and engineer named Clovis Silveira. They have 2 sons named Jan and Alan. In 1966, she was hired by the Companhia Telefônica Brasileira. Hopefully I said that right.
Nice job.
We're going to call it CTB.
Yes.
There, she worked as an architect, leading design projects and supervising and coordinating the development of telephone centrals and service station projects. Between that time, she also, I think it was between that time and 1972, she headed the CTB projects department. Working in the projects department, she was actually approached with a really serious problem that was happening. there was a severe need for a new design for phone booths in Brazil.
Huh.
It seems simple, but it wasn't really. The current phone booths that were in Brazil were like searing hot to the touch because they were metal and glass, and they would get like super hot
Yeah, in the sun.
in the sun. And also, it's like basically going into an oven while you're trying to make a phone call.
Oh, yeah. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah. And the phone booths, the way that they were built, they seemed to gather the city noise rather than provide a quiet place for someone to make a phone call. They were constantly being vandalized, and they
yes.
were super expensive to make and to maintain. Many people in Brazil would actually just like go to stores, they would go to bars, they would go to pharmacies and other places just to be able to use the phone. And it was creating a problem because it's like the reason the phone booths are out there is to get the people
Yeah.
get out of the way.
Yeah. So you're not like holding up the line at the pharmacy when people need drugs and you're
Can I
like,
use your phone?
Hey, Mom, can I stay the night at Cindy's?
And it doesn't seem like you don't think about stuff like that. It's like that's what these people are for. I don't think about, design and things like that. So she was challenged to create a new design that would be inexpensive to make and to maintain. It had to offer shelter to the phones and the users. It had to be damage resistant. It had to be aesthetically pleasing, and it had to be unobtrusive on the streets of the large metropolitan areas. It's a lot of boxes she had to check.
I don't know if anybody really realizes, unless you've been there, how fucking huge São Paulo is. So
It seemed like a ginormous area.
it's a big city in and of itself, but if you take in the whole metro area, it's 22 million people.
Holy shit.
It's much larger than New York City.
Didn't know it was that big.
And it's jam-packed in there. So like when they're talking about the noise and stuff, it is noisy. Like really, really noisy. Because, everybody's on the roads. They have these moto boys. They would ride motorcycles, and they have no regard for traffic rules.
Ooh.
So they would like ride in between lanes of cars, like going like 80 miles an hour.
And I imagine you've got people talking, people.
Oh, it's
the
so
noise of
loud.
life. Yeah.
And like the favelas are jam-packed full of people living in poverty. And there are so many people in just like a really concentrated area. There's just no way it couldn't be noisy all the time.
Yeah.
But 22 million people,
Yikes.
it's so many
That's
people.
so many people.
So I can see why, one, they would need to have lots of access for public telephones, because there are in São Paulo and in Rio there's a lot of poor people living in favelas and stuff, and probably didn't have the access to telephones.
A telephone, yeah.
Would need to have public telephones. And if you ever wanted to use them for anything other than ordering a pizza or whatever, you'd need it to be quiet.
Yeah.
And not a death box.
Death box. All right. So she has all this criteria in mind. She begins drafting and designing a new concept. So she said she drew inspiration she loves contemporary design. She liked curved objects like, have you ever seen the egg chair by Arnie Jacobson?
Yeah.
Yes. So she really liked that curved design.
It's like an oval egg with like a circle cut out in the middle, and you sit inside it, and
It's
it kind
so
of
comfy too.
I've never sat in one. I've only seen them in like Austin Powers.
I saw one at a thrift store and I got in it and I was like, I feel like an alien.
Man, if I ever had a mid-century modern house, I think I'd probably put in an egg chair.
Righteous. She actually started studying domed music halls as well. Because back then they used to use the architecture because there was no speakers. There was no projection of sound. So they would, of course, curve the walls to help the sound go out to the audience. She went around shopping for building materials, and she landed on what was the cheapest and most durable. So at the moment, it was lightweight fiberglass. Which is pretty, you can throw that stuff around and it's pretty sturdy.
Yeah.
So she just decided that this could be easily molded into almost like a shell and like that organic egg shape that she liked. But then she almost started thinking of ears as well, of how our ears are shaped.
Oh, okay.
So she decided that the egg shape would reflect the interior sounds to a point below the ear of an average user, while also deflecting external noise. So she's actually trying to take in terms too of what is the average height of the average user who's using a telephone, which is probably pretty difficult to do. It was simple and it was a clever solution as well. Also, this design would provide cover from the elements, so the curvature would go over the people. It would provide privacy without enclosing the person's body entirely, so you're not in this death box. And she presented this, as she presented this idea, she felt like she checked all the boxes. She offered 2 versions of her design. It was named after her. There was the Chu 1 and the Chu 2. Chu 1 was a small acrylic orange shell, and it was designed to fit into small, tight places, which, as you're describing, probably in the bigger metro areas. And then she designed a larger one, which was orange and blue, which was more suitable for like opener, like wider, more open areas. They were put out around the city, and people started calling them orejelos.
Yeah.
Like,
Or, yeah.
how do you say it?
I'd have to see it.
It means big ears.
Yeah, I was going to say it means ears.
Yeah, and then the little one was called the orelhinha, which I
Oh,
think
little
hinha
ear.
and hino
Yeah.
is, means little, like the female male connotation of big and little. So she said this about her design. She wanted it to be a living organism that protects its inhabitants and participates with them from the nuances of their daily living, reflecting and contributing to the fulfillment of their vital function. The project, not attached to previous styles, is linked to a greater commitment to accompany the personal growth in all senses of each of its inhabitants. So it sounded like she was trying to design a very comforting space for people. So not just taking in that she had to create, it's a phone booth, but also there's a lot more to it.
I am trying to think if I saw one of those.
I was going to ask you that. I can show you a picture of it.
Yeah, I definitely want to see a picture because I went to Brazil in 2005. So it's quite a while ago at this
Yeah.
point, but still before everybody and their mom had cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
So potentially those were still around.
Yeah.
I wonder if they still are now. Like, I was reading something the other day about how like there's only like 2 London phone booths left.
The red ones?
Yeah, I think so.
That's crazy.
Like there, and like New York City, I think there are like 2 working ones in the whole city or something like that.
Jeez.
So it's becoming like a thing that doesn't exist because most people have phones of their own that they carry with them. So it's always interesting to see like, okay, now that we're getting rid of those things, are we going to miss them? Are we going to miss at least the history and the architecture of that?
Yeah. These shells were first built by the hundreds, and they were so popular they started being put out by the thousands, and then they started going to the tens of thousands all across Brazil. Within the year, CTB, that telephone company that she was working for, reported a 12% increase in phone usage.
Oh, cool.
The design was so popular that it also went abroad. It went, variations of it went to other Latin American countries, as well as Africa and Asia. And for the people of Brazil, her phone booth design is so distinctive and iconic. They say it's kind of their own version of the British phone
Oh,
booth.
the British phone booth.
In 1973, Chu served as senior architect at Montreal, SA, and later that year she worked on projects at Serete, SA, and Genaria, both in Sao Paulo, where she worked until 1978, where she devoted all her time to design and visual communication. In 1975, Chu and her husband decided to build a house. I know this sounds terrible, a house out of concrete and glass, but I saw a picture of the house. It is visually stunning.
I watched that show, The World's Most Extraordinary Homes,
Yeah.
and there are some homes that when I know what they're made of, I'm like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
But then I see them and I'm like, oh my God, that is stunning. And I think that you have to have a certain kind of creativity and creative brain to understand what something will look like, not at the beginning or at its base level of elements,
Yeah.
but what it will all look like together.
And two, they both wanted concrete because it's fairly warm.
Mm-hmm.
And they were thinking that would provide a cooler element for them. And also because they wanted more glass, which obviously is going to let in more light. and a little bit more warmth. And so they balanced it out with the coolness of the concrete.
And where do they live? What area of Brazil?
They were living this is in Sao Paulo,
Okay.
but I'm imagining on the outer areas, because where it didn't look like big city living.
Yeah, like I said, the metro area is so huge and so filled with people.
From 1987, she turned to the development of residential projects on the coast of Sao Paulo. She stayed true to her original way of design, and it was simple, and she really had what she called a respect to nature and using materials and techniques in harmony with the Brazilian culture. She died suddenly at the age of 56 in 1997.
Oh, wow. That's
I
pretty
was
young.
I was trying to find the reason why she died. Like, was it a heart attack or did she get sick? And I couldn't find out how she died. A lot of things just said she suddenly died. And I was like, well, how? So into like we're talking about the rise in cell phone use, the necessity for the phone booths has gone down, but her design still remains all around the city. Some are functional, most are not. People have bought old unused shells and repurposed them as furniture, which I thought was really cool. They popped them off and turned them upside down and made them into chairs, which was really cool.
Like the egg chairs
Like the egg
that she
chairs.
was inspired by to begin with.
In 2001, Sao Paulo honored Chu's design and did what ended up being called the Call Parade. There was a call for local artists to take a shell and feature their own art on them, making each one like a unique piece of urban art. And I like that. So they do the Call Parade every year. And
That's cool.
They do the shout out, and I saw some of the shells. And we have that here in Spokane with utility boxes.
Yeah.
They do a local call. The Spokane Arts does a call for artists. They submit a design, and then I think they pick 20 or so.
Yeah, I think so.
And they really do add a little something to the neighborhood. We've got one just over here by our house, which is really pretty. It's got jellyfish on them. And
I like the one that I took a picture of it one day because I was walking and I kept driving by it and I kept stopping at the stoplight that it was at, and I kept looking at it, and it said something on there that I found to be at that moment exactly the thing I needed to see and read.
nice.
And it was something about find your own truth or whatever. And I love that kind of unexpected art.
Mm-hmm.
Spokane also does a really great job with art. We have a lot of train bridges. We're known as a train city.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've got these really kind of intrusive, ugly, giant,
Large bridges.
yeah, and they're all cinder block and whatever. So they've been commissioning artists over the last, however many years to create murals
Mm-hmm.
on or underneath those train bridges. And there are just some really incredible things that have been placed there that I love being able to drive around the city, and something that would normally look like a concrete blight
Yeah.
is actually a beautiful piece of local art.
Now's art. Yeah.
And it does deter tagging,
Yeah.
which is good too.
I really like that. It's also because her shells are such a odd shape. It's really natural and organic. It looks like half of an egg, but to see people's paintings on there and stuff is really cool.
Well, and when you said it, how turning it upside down and turning it into a chair, I actually thought about the art you do, making the boxes.
Yeah.
How you could probably do something inside of one of those that's very similar.
That would be really cool.
You should tell everybody what kind of art you do.
I do Latin folk art, and I pull a lot from, I like to make ofrendas, which are tiny altars, typically always done on the Day of the Dead. And it's, the ofrendas have 4 elements. It's water, fire, earth, and wind are the 4 things that should always be included in there. And it's basically your altar to your people that have passed away. But I started taking kind of a spin on it and making it an altar to things. I just did one for what I called missing pieces, which was an altar to things that I have lost from myself. And so being able to put it in that box and being able to acknowledge it is really important to me.
I think you could take one of her little eggs and make an ofrenda inside, and it'd be great.
I think it would be awesome. So all of my information came from graphene.com, Mujeres con Ciencia, 99percentvisible.com, and Wikipedia.
Nice job.
You're welcome. And I really do encourage people to look at the little things around their community, especially their local art, their urban art. And, I'm fascinated by design. And so I feel like people don't appreciate it enough.
Yeah.
Like little things like that make our lives easier every day. Somebody did that.
Somebody thought, hey, you know what would make your life easier? This.
Yes. So I'm glad that Chu took such care to detail to make things easier for people. Even if it's just a phone. So who do you have today?
So you remember last week when we were talking about my rheumatologist?
Yes.
And I had said that her nurse had told me that like there's a shortage of rheumatologists and neurologists because people don't go into those fields anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I wonder who the first woman was who became a neurologist.
Whoa.
So I looked it up, and there are like two women that sort of get debated over whether or not they were the first.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one was from like Sweden or something. But both of them had pretty short biographies online, and like they were interesting in that they were women who did something that was really cool. But I was like not really moved by their stories. I thought it was really cool they did those things and everybody should be happy they did them.
Yeah.
But when I was looking it up, another name kept popping up.
Okay.
Her name was Alexa Canady.
I don't know her.
Alexa was the first American woman and first African American to become a neurosurgeon.
Ooh. Okay.
So she ticked both boxes. So I'm going to tell you about Alexa.
Okay.
Alexa Irene Canady was born in Lansing, Michigan on November 7th, 1950 to parents Elizabeth Hortense, she actually went by Hortense, and father Dr. Clinton Canady Jr., which she's younger than my mom.
Oh, my parents were born in 51, so she's about my parents' age. Yeah.
Yeah, my mom was born in 45.
Ooh.
Alexa's family was an upper middle class black family living in a predominantly white neighborhood in Michigan. Her parents were both well educated. They actually met while attending undergraduate school at Fisk University. Her parents married really young, actually on her mother's 18th birthday.
Wow.
And that was because her father was leaving to fight in World War II.
Oh, wow. So they wanted to.
They needed to get that done
He
in
wanted
case
to have
he
it on
died,
lock.
right?
Yeah.
When he returned from the war, Alexa's father graduated from Fisk and then went on to Meharry Medical College, which was I think it's a black medical college,
Okay.
a historic black college. And he earned his degree in dentistry, which we had a dentist last week. Alexa's mother was nothing to shake a stick at either. Like, she became the president of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority, which we've talked about before. That is a predominantly black sorority for college-educated women.
Okay.
And they focus on doing service in African-American communities.
Oh, it's beautiful.
So she was the president of the sorority.
Nice.
And her father was a well-respected dentist in the community. In fact, I thought this was interesting. So her mom was well known as also as someone who was very engaged in the community, specifically in civic stuff, like government type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
She actually much later on, when Alexa was an adult, Alexa's mother became the first black woman to be elected to a citywide position when she ran for and won a position on the school board.
Wow.
Which is interesting because Alexa and her brother were the only black children in their schools.
Wow.
Yeah. So education was a really big part of their life at home. Her parents really wanted her and her brother to do well at school, and they would always push them and support them and tell them, like, we're behind you 100%. You push yourself farther. But that was obviously sometimes difficult when you're the only two black kids at a school full of white kids.
Yeah.
And Alexa's mother would tell her this a lot. Let them make you the token. So what if you're the token black girl? Take that token and spend it.
Ooh. That could be a song.
I know. It's probably, I'm not black, so I haven't heard it before. Have you heard that saying before?
a token black person?
No, like take the token and spend it.
No, not in that way.
I love that. Like taking that phrase, which can
Yeah.
be really awful.
Yeah, like literally when she said that, my head went back. I was like, I don't like that phrase.
And then turning it on its head and owning, reclaiming it. I thought it was really cool.
And also taking away its power.
Yes.
And putting it in your hand.
So we all know that it's like one of those like moments in a movie where you're like, yeah, girl. But the reality of racism is a lot more insidious and harmful.
Yeah.
So I'm going to share a story with you, and I'm going to have Dr. Canady actually tell the story herself because she is still alive and doing it. And I thought it was really important that this come from her since it's available in her voice and in the way she's going to tell it. So this is a clip that we're going to share from a local PBS station in Pensacola, Florida. There was an interview that she was doing on a television show called Aware. And she's talking about something that happened to her during her years in elementary school.
My grandmother was in for the summer, probably to play with the grandchildren, and took a course at Michigan State. And they needed subjects, and she had grandchildren. So we all got tested as part of that course. And the testing that I had showed really very good results. And so the professor took it on himself to talk to my elementary school principal, saying, you got this student here who really has ability. What are you doing with her? And so he pulled out my test from the school, which showed that I was just an average student. And in the course of the investigation of the disparity between those two things, it turned out that my second grade teacher had lied about who the scores belonged to and had reassigned them to somebody else. And she ended up apparently getting fired. But I didn't know the story until I was in high school.
Her teacher was changing her grades?
Her teacher was giving her test scores to a white girl.
The fuck?
Her fucking teacher. A teacher of 8-year-olds, 7-year-olds.
What is there to gain from doing that?
Obviously I can't even fathom doing that. I can't get inside somebody's head who's doing that.
No.
But my assumption is that she didn't care for black people with upward mobility.
Yeah.
And she wanted...
And she was going to make sure she stayed down.
Yeah. And help out this white girl. I mean, also you're setting up this white girl for failure.
Yeah.
Like she's not actually that smart. And what's going to happen when she gets into a situation that she can't actually handle?
Yeah.
Like you're
hurting so many people.
And then unfortunately, if that happens to that white girl, and she makes a fool of herself, then it reinforces this idea that girls aren't as smart or they're not as capable at math or whatever it is.
Wow. Good thing she got fired. I'm surprised they discovered it or even dug to discover it, you know?
Well, it was the professor that was supervising her grandmother.
Okay.
It wasn't her grandmother. It wasn't her family. It was this professor who saw these. And actually, I read a thing where it was a longer interview where she said that, so her grandmother did these tests. She sent the results in for her class. And the professor was like, holy shit, this girl is off the charts. I want to meet her and I want to test her and make sure that this wasn't like a problem with the test or that it was, it is your granddaughter. So maybe you were,
okay.
So this professor pulls her into a classroom and does hours of testing, just him and her, and is like, this girl's intellect is off the charts.
So he wanted to go back and see what the teacher was doing for research.
Yeah,
the process.
Well, he went to the school and he was like, she should be in all of the gifted and talented programs that you have. Why isn't she enrolled in any of them? I need to see why. And that's when the principal was like, well, her scores are just average. And this professor was like, well, I'm telling you she's not.
Yeah.
And I know more than you do. And so like, if that weren't for that person really pushing,
who knows?
So I am like of the mind that this second grade teacher could have derailed this woman's life forever. And when you find out everything she did with her life, it is so disgraceful. So despite this incident and obviously many others that she encountered, she went on to become one of the top students in not just her class in her high school, but also in the entire country. In 1967, she was nominated as a National Achievement Scholar, which was a program that honored exceptional Black students across the United States. She was in the top of the top.
Wow.
After high school, Dr. Canady enrolled at the University of Michigan. Initially, she signed up to be a math major, and she was getting mediocre grades, not really going to class, because she really didn't like what she was doing. And she had what she called a crisis of confidence. And she was like, I just don't think I'm good at this. This is what I'm not cut out for this. And she considered like just dropping out of school altogether. However, her brother was like, hey, you know what? There's this summer internship. I think you should give it a shot. And she really wanted to buy a car. And she had already signed up for a summer job. So she was supposed to work at this newspaper, and her job at the newspaper started at like 5 o'clock. And so she thought, you know, if I get this other job, I'll be able to buy a car sooner. And since this other job doesn't start till 5, I can do both.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what she does. She decides to do both. Well, that second job was actually a job in a medical lab.
Okay.
And that was what changes the direction of her entire life. She fell in love with medicine. And she decided that that's what she wanted to do, that she was going to pursue her career in medicine. So she graduated from her undergrad in 1971 with a degree in zoology, and then continued on at medical school at the University of Michigan.
In zoology?
It was a Bachelor of Science in zoology. I don't know why.
Okay.
Maybe that was what, I don't know. I thought
Still
that was weird
bachelor's.
too. It was a Bachelor's of Science, and then she went on to medical school.
Okay.
So a few years ago, the National Women's Law Center was doing a whole thing on Title IX and having women who benefited from Title IX talk about their experiences of being in school. And it was called The Faces of Title IX. So she actually wrote an essay for them. And so I'm going to tell you what she said it was like to attend medical school as a Black woman in the early 1970s.
Mm.
There were about 25 women in my medical school class of 200. 5 or 6 were African American. The first time a professor slipped a naked woman in with the lecture slides, all of the women gasped. It quickly became apparent that we were in a man's world. Professors frequently overlooked the women's raised hands, and most of the prestigious clubs and societies were all male. The white women in my class were shocked and outraged that they weren't being taken seriously. I'd hear them complain between classes how unfair it was. It was the first time they had felt pushed aside. But I just put my head down and worked harder. I was used to being disregarded.
Oh, geez. It's a painful truth.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it really highlights something that is important as a white feminist to recognize that I know what it's like to feel disregarded, but I have no idea what it's like to feel disregarded in the way that she does.
Mm-hmm.
That there is a whole other level to it, a whole layer, and it's interconnected. And that is something that's important, I think, for all white women to recognize and move forward, and why it's important that you have intersectional feminism, that you understand that.
Yeah.
Or at least do your best to try to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, she thought that she was going to go into internal medicine, pretty popular. But during those first 2 years in med school, she became very fascinated by and enamored with the human brain. When she told others that she wanted to become a neurosurgeon, many people advised against it, including her parents.
Ooh.
Who
Okay.
up until then had been very supportive of everything she just decided to do.
Do you think it was going to be too hard for her, or?
Yeah, it seems like her advisors and her parents didn't think that she would be able to overcome all of the obstacles that would be in her way in order to actually become a neurosurgeon.
Yeah.
They wanted her to set her sights on something that was possible, and they felt that this was impossible.
Yeah.
It
Reach
was
for the
just-
stars, but not that one.
Yeah. Because of all of the medical specialties in the world, neurosurgery is almost exclusively
Mhm.
male and almost exclusively white at this point in time. And so she was really like climbing a mountain.
Yeah. With one hand tied behind her back.
Yeah. So she set out to prove them wrong. Alexa knew it wouldn't matter if she was at the top of her class or if she was the best at everything. She knew that wouldn't matter. That still wasn't going to be enough. That she had to work even harder and do even more. So she began to read every single recent article, every peer-reviewed journal, every neurology publication. She would memorize them. She would learn all of the newest techniques that people were trying, all of the newest drugs, everything possible. Like, she was ahead of the game. She would go to conferences and seminars. She would go to meetings. She constantly asked questions. She made herself really visible so that everybody would know that she was working hard.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a sad fact that she had to do that, right?
Yeah.
So when it came time to secure a surgical internship, she met with the chairman of neurosurgery at Michigan. She had 2 interviews with him and got a call to come back to school on Christmas Eve to interview for a 3rd time. And she was stoked.
Yeah.
Like, this is a good sign. I'm going in my 3rd interview. I'm going to get this. And it's amazing. But when she got there, her hopes were shattered. This is what she said.
Oh.
For the next 2 hours, he rattled off name after name of former residents whom he'd fired from the program. I was stunned. I suddenly realized that I was only there because he'd been pressured into interviewing me.
I don't understand. What?
He had no intention of ever giving her a surgical internship because he didn't think that she was worth it. And the only reason he was even going through the motions was because somebody was telling him he had to. Probably, I mean, I'm reading between the lines here, probably because of something like affirmative action in his mind. Like, a waste of his time.
Yeah.
Even though this was obviously pretty heartbreaking to her.
Yeah.
Alexa decided that she was going to continue on. And after many, many more interviews all across the country, she was finally accepted to Yale New Haven Hospital for a surgical internship in 1975. Just want to tell you that she is 25 at this time.
Oof.
On her first day of her internship, an administrator saw her and said, "Oh, you must be our new equal opportunity package."
Wow. Oh, that is so terrible. Like, oh, you're here because we're letting you be here because you're black and we have to.
Yeah,
Not
you didn't
that
earn
she
it.
fucking worked her ass off to get there. And she's brilliant.
Yeah,
I hate that little, you're only here because we have to.
because you're a
now.
diversity hire.
Exactly.
So actually, I want to talk about what she had to say about that. She went on to train. So despite this, she actually, by her fellow physicians, was voted one of the top residents during her surgical internship. And then she went on to train as a resident at the University of Minnesota in 1976, which just being able to become a resident made her the first African-American woman to become a neurosurgery resident.
Wow.
In 1976. So 30 years later, in 99, she is reflecting on this, and she said this: "When I got a residency in neurosurgery, I got it not because I'm smarter than somebody 40 years ago, but because the politics were such that they needed a black woman, and I was there and qualified. I had impeccable credentials coming out of medical school, but there was an undercurrent of, how can you, a black woman, have the audacity to want to do this? Don't you know that you've got a double whammy? Well, I came along at a time when it offered them a double positive. They could fulfill the quota and say, I finished a woman, I finished a black, and all it took was one person instead of 2.
Jeez. She's got that token. She's spending it.
But just the idea that this is why affirmative action mattered in the first place and still matters today.
Mm-hmm.
This is why, quote unquote, diversity hires matter. This woman was always amazing, but she wasn't going to get a foot in the door without that spot being saved for someone like her.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't that there was some qualified white guy who didn't get one, he was going to go somewhere else. Like there was always going to be that opportunity for him. But that was not going to happen for her. She makes the point of saying, 40 years before me, there were women and black men just as smart as me, just as capable. In fact, probably even more. But that position wasn't available to them. So, you know, what did we miss out on?
Yeah. When you say it, like when you say that, it makes me think, how many other children did that teacher put back that changed their paths and their lives?
And the hundreds and thousands of teachers who were just like her, who did everything in their power to perpetuate systemic racism and continue to today, to be fair.
Yeah.
It's not like we fixed that problem.
No.
There are plenty of racist teachers out there. And that kind of thing just really gets to me. I think that it's really important for, and especially white people, to hear that affirmative action isn't about you. And it never was, and it never will be. You will still find the spot for your feet to land. The whole idea behind affirmative action is to make sure that people who have been historically left behind get a chance to keep up. That's all. So during her residency, Dr. Canady discovered that within neurosurgery, she had a specific passion: pediatric neurosurgery.
Ooh, that's a very niche.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She loved being around children. She'd always loved to be around children. And she found that she had a really good sort of personality for working with kids. And she could make something that felt very scary feel less scary to them. Because again, this is neurosurgery. These little kids are coming in with significant and sometimes terminal problems. And she said that one of the things that really ignited that passion in her to do pediatric neurosurgery was that those kids have no idea how, like, you know, they're facing down death. And yet we're joyous and happy and able to have fun and smile. And she was like, it just taught me so much about the human spirit. And I just wanted to do everything I could to make their lives better. So after finishing her residency in 1982, she became the first American woman and first African American to become a pediatric neurosurgeon. She's 32 years old.
My goodness. So young.
I know. She briefly worked at the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia and at the Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit before being hired at the Children's Hospital of Michigan. In 1984, she became certified by the American Board of Neurological Surgery, becoming the first African American woman to become board certified.
Wow.
Like, she's not done, right?
Yeah.
So very quickly, in her brand new position, she becomes well known for her leadership and for her level of care for patients. Her philosophy was very patient-centered. She just really wanted patients to feel comfortable and at ease. And she had this whole philosophy of, if you don't have a relationship with them, they won't trust you. And if they don't trust you, they're not going to tell you what's really happening. And then they're going to go home and they're going to say, well, the doctor didn't fix me. So she's like, it was my job to make sure they felt comfortable enough to tell me what was really going on. And I love that, as you know, as somebody who's been having a lot of issues. It's so important to have a doctor you can connect with. So just a few years after being hired in 1987, she became the chief of neurosurgery at the Children's Hospital. She was 36.
Whoa. The chief of
She's the chief of neurosurgery at the Children's Hospital of Michigan.
Wow.
And as if that wasn't enough, she's in charge of all of neurosurgery. She also begins teaching as a clinical instructor of neurosurgery at Wayne State University. She actually does that for almost the whole time she's a neurosurgeon. And she actually becomes a full professor in 1997 and eventually became vice chair of the Department of Neurosurgery.
Shit.
while also being the chief of neurosurgery. Under her leadership, the Children's Hospital of Michigan became one of the leading hospitals in the country for pediatric neurosurgery. She performed 12 surgeries every week and specialized in craniofacial abnormalities, tumors, seizure disorders, congenital spinal abnormalities, and specifically hydrocephalus, which is where there's fluid on the brain. Also, because of its location, it was in Detroit, her program became really unique and really forward in medicine in dealing with children with gunshot wounds in the 90s.
Wow.
Dr. Canady loved working at the Children's Hospital, and she loved what she did. And so I want you to hear her talking about her philosophy of medicine and why she believes neurosurgery is important.
What would you say?
There are very few things in life in which the only goal of your job is to make people better. That's all. And the rest of it will fall in place. And that feels good. Mm-hmm. You know, you don't get that midlife crisis where it's like, I'm not so happy that I'm really doing well by people. But here, all you're trying to do is do well by them. Mm-hmm. So it's fun. It feels really good to make people better. And you get an opportunity to be part of people's lives in a way that's much more intimate than other kinds of professions. I mean, I took care of a number of children over the course of their entire childhood, and I became like part of the family. I knew the children and their siblings and grandmother and grandfather. I knew when to listen. Some people don't complain, and I know that even though they're not complaining, they're in trouble. And I knew when people who would complain all the time, I could ascertain when it was real and when it was not. So having an opportunity, and that's why I liked pediatrics, because we take care of people over time. You get to know people, and so you can better serve them.
That's really brilliant.
Yeah. And I also like this idea that because she worked with pediatric kids, with children, she got to be their doctor for a long time. Mm-hmm. And it really does build that relationship.
Yeah.
So from 1987 until 2001, Dr. Canady served as the chief of neurosurgery at the Children's Hospital of Michigan. She decided in 2001 to retire with her husband, who she had met and married in 1988. And the two of them moved to Pensacola, Florida. Okay, so she's going to Florida. She's going to live out her retirement.
Yeah.
She's still pretty young, right?
Yeah. Barely. Yeah.
Yeah, like she's like 51.
Jeez.
When she's retired. And so she goes back, she goes to Florida. And once there, she starts talking to all these local doctors who are like, we really need what you do. We need this here. So she decided to come out of retirement and she went back to work at Sacred Heart Hospital in Pensacola. And she also continued to do research on brain and brain surgery as part of Wayne State University, where she's a full professor. And during that time, they had been working on a device that would help kids with hydrocephalus. And so, of course, she's not done yet.
Yeah.
She's got to top everything. And along with two other surgeons, Dr. Canady helped invent a programmable anti-siphon shunt to treat hydrocephalus. And she currently shares the U.S. patent on it.
Oh, that's so cool.
I know. I was
Did
like,
you pull up the patent? Because you know I love patents.
I saw the picture of it. I was like, Rita's going to love the patent. Dr. Canady finally officially retired in 2012.
Oh, my goodness.
But she still continues to do talks at schools around Pensacola area. And sometimes even if people want to bring her in, she'll go to universities and talk, and also to high schools. And she even mentors some high school students around the area. She is an advocate for the importance and value of neurosurgery, and especially for diversity in the sciences and medicine. Dr. Alexa Canady was inducted into the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame in 1989 and received the American Medical Women's Association President's Award in 1993.
That's really cool.
And she was also named Teacher of the Year in 1984 by the Children's Hospital of Michigan. Her work as a pediatric neurosurgeon has resulted in hundreds of children's lives being saved. And she serves as a beacon of hope for young women and people of color who are interested in going into a medical field. I decided to do a little research. And I found that minority representation in medical schools has actually declined since the early aughts.
I read an article about that. I had read some girl had written a paper and talking about the declining numbers, especially women.
Yeah, women and especially people
Women
of
of
color.
color.
And in 2015, just 6% of medical school graduates were Black.
Whoa.
Only 5% were Latino.
Jeez.
And specialties like neurosurgery have seen a decline in overall enrollment numbers, which means that there are even fewer African Americans obtaining specialty medical degrees. And that is, as we've already discussed on the show multiple times, terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Studies have shown that if you have a Black doctor and you are a Black patient, you are more likely to, one, tell them what's really going on,
Mm-hmm.
and two, get the treatment you actually need. So it's super, super important for people of color to become doctors so that other people of color have good doctors.
Mm-hmm.
But there are so many institutional barriers, and the fact that our schools are more segregated now than they were in 1970, it's creating a dearth of qualified kids going into these fields.
Yeah.
So Dr. Canady would like to see that change. And I'd like to leave with her speaking about what her advice is to young people, especially young people of color, on how to deal with institutional racism and the societal barriers, particularly for those who are trying to enter science or medical fields.
You have to not let other people define you. You have to know yourself and understand their problem versus your problem. So you can't give yourself your sense of self-worth to somebody else.
It's really good advice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't give your sense of self-worth to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that that's the kind of advice that's like helpful to think about. It's like that, don't let someone take up space in your brain rent-free.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you do that? And I think that is difficult. And I also think that platitudes like that are necessary because you need to internalize them and believe them and go forward in your life feeling those things are true. But I also think that it's still incumbent upon all of us, especially people who have more privilege and power, to break down, recognize first, and then work to break down those barriers and offer steps up for people who need them. So I'm here on a platform advocating for things like affirmative action and diversity hires because they're important.
Yes.
I would say if you don't believe they're important, ask one of her patients.
Mm.
So the clips that you heard on this episode on my story are all from WSRE Pensacola. And it's a show on there called Aware with Dee Dee Sharp. So the host of the show is Dee Dee Sharp. And you can find their episodes on YouTube. Wikipedia also had a pretty good extensive article on her, so that was cool. I went to a website called The History Makers, and there were a couple of other videos on there that were from 2006 that I watched.
Mm-hmm.
But the quality wasn't great, and so they wouldn't translate to audio. And I also used the National Society of Black Physicists, Alexa Canady, Black History in the Making by Judy Sarason, who was working for Health and Human Services, Changing the Face of Medicine, The Faces of Title IX, Encyclopedia.com, and the U.S. National Library of Medicine.
Nice. Amazing story.
Yeah.
She didn't stop.
No, and
Yeah.
she's still out there helping young people
Nice.
get into the field.
Yeah. That is
And
awesome.
I loved her, and
That's really cool that you just stumbled upon too.
yeah, I was gonna do this other person, but there wasn't as much information, and also the story wasn't as interesting. I just really liked what she had to say, and also I think that story about the second grade teacher it's so specific and yet felt so importantly universal.
Yeah.
That that teacher is one of carbon copies of
Yep.
teachers who have done bad things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I don't have to tell you that, there are teachers who are not interested in advancing every student.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness she didn't get stopped.
I know.
Yeah.
and that she kept pushing through, despite even her own parents' objections.
I know. Parents are like, you sure?
Well, thank you everyone for listening. I do have one request. I would love to see our download and subscription numbers go up before our 1 year anniversary.
Oh, yeah, we're hitting our podiversary.
Yes, our podiversary is coming up on January 2nd. And we are really, fingers crossed, hoping that you can get us over a threshold. If you are interested in this podcast, you've listened to one episode, you liked one, great. Go download all the others, save them for a rainy day, tell your friends, please pass it along. And I'm really serious about this one this time. Like, we say it every week, but like, please do this.
Share it.
Help us get over this number threshold. We want to hit 10,000 as soon as possible, preferably before our 1 year anniversary. So we've got 4 weeks to do that in. I'm sure we can do it. If we have your help. So please help us, pass us along on social media, send our episode links to your friends, tell them to subscribe, subscribe on multiple devices.
We know you got them.
Yeah, exactly. And I really hope that we can get us over that threshold so that we can work on creating a business plan. And I thank you guys for listening, and also for Lucas.
Thank you, Lucas.
Our wonderful editor. And
Jennifer Finch.
of L7 for our wonderful theme music.
Thank you, guys.
Have a great week.